The Last Castle. May 5, 1945, North Tyrol, Austria. If you looked through the vision slit of the M4 Sherman tank parked in the archway of the medieval castle, you would see a sight that defied every logic of the last 6 years of war. Inside the stone courtyard, an American GI was sharing a cigarette with a soldier of the German Wehrmacht. Nearby, a former French prime minister was loading ammunition into a machine gun, while a Waffen-SS unit maneuvered in the woods below, preparing to kill them all. This was not a fever dream. This was Castle Itter, and for the men inside, the war was not over. It was about to reach its most desperate, surreal climax. The setup. 5 days earlier, Adolf Hitler had put a bullet in his head in a bunker in Berlin. The Third Reich was collapsing, its spine snapped, its leaders fleeing like rats. But in the Austrian Tyrol, the fanaticism of the Waffen-SS burned brighter than ever. They were roaming the countryside, executing traitors and refusing to surrender. High on a hill overlooking the village of Itter sat a 13th-century fortress. For 2 years, it had served as a VIP prison for the Nazis. The honor prisoners held there were the crème de la crème of the French Republic. Former Prime Ministers Edward Daladier and Paul Reynaud, Generals Weygand and Gamelin, the tennis legend Jean Bouchard, and Charles de Gaulle's sister, Marie-Agnès Callot. As the American 12th Armored Division pushed into Austria, the castle's SS guards had fled, fearing capture. The prisoners were technically free, but they were trapped. The woods surrounding the castle were teeming with the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division Gutz von Berlichingen. These SS troops had orders: leave no witnesses. The VIPs were to be executed before the Americans could liberate them. Desperate, the prisoners sent a bicycle courier to find help. He didn't find a massive American column. He found something stranger. The unlikely alliance. Captain John C. Lee, a cigar-chewing, rough-and-tumble tank commander from Norwich, New York, looked at the map. He commanded the Besohatten Jenny, an M4 Sherman tank, and a handful of infantrymen from the 23rd Tank Battalion. When the breathless courier explained that the former heads of the French government were trapped in a castle surrounded by the SS, Lee didn't hesitate. "Well," he spat, checking his Thompson submachine gun, "let's go get 'em." But Lee was outnumbered. He needed backup. In a twist that history struggles to comprehend, help came from the enemy. Major Josef Gangl, a decorated German Wehrmacht officer, had been preparing to surrender his unit to the Americans. Gangl was a career soldier, not a Nazi. He had seen enough death. When he heard about the SS plan to massacre the French prisoners, he made a decision that would mark him for death by his own countrymen. He offered his services and his men to Captain Lee. So the column rolled out, 1 American tank, 14 American GIs, and a truckload of 20 German Wehrmacht soldiers, united against the SS. The siege began. They arrived at Castle Itter under the cloak of twilight. The greeting was chaotic. The French VIPs, men who were used to giving orders to armies, were now taking orders from a 27-year-old American captain. Lee assessed the situation with cold pragmatism. The castle was a defensive nightmare. It was old, the walls were thick, but there was only one entrance, a narrow bridge. He parked the Besohatten Jenny directly in the main gate to act as a pillbox. He positioned his GIs and Gangl's Wehrmacht soldiers along the parapets. "Nobody sleeps tonight," Lee ordered. The air was thick with the scent of pine and impending violence. The night passed in a series of probing attacks. Shadows moved in the tree line. Bullets snapped against the ancient stone. The SS were testing the defenses, looking for weak points. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Men who had been shooting at each other weeks ago were now sharing canteens. Major Gangle and Captain Lee walked the walls together, enemies by uniform, brothers in survival. Dawn broke on May 5th with a deafening roar. The SS didn't just bring rifles, they brought an 88mm anti-aircraft gun and positioned it on a ridge overlooking the castle. The first shell screamed through the air and slammed into the upper floors of the castle, showering the courtyard in dust and masonry. "Get down!" Lee roared, diving behind the stone balustrade. Then the Besohatten Jenny took a direct hit. The 88mm shell tore through the Sherman's armor. The tank, their heavy hitter, their iron gatekeeper, erupted in flames. The crew bailed out just in time, choking in black smoke, scrambling back into the castle proper. Now they had no heavy support. They were infantry against an army. The SS infantry swarmed up the hill. They came from the west and the north, using the dense forest for cover. The sound of MG-42 machine guns, Hitler's zippers, tore into the silence of the Austrian morning. On the walls, the scene was chaotic. American GIs fired their M1 Garands alongside Wehrmacht soldiers, firing Kar 98K rifles. They shouted target locations to each other in broken English and German. "Lynx, to the left, by the tree! I see him! Got him!" But the defenders were running low on ammunition. The volume of fire coming from the woods was overwhelming. The SS were inching closer, moving tree to tree, tightening the noose. Inside the keep, the French VIPs refused to hide in the cellar. Boratra, the tennis star, vaulted over a wall to scout enemy positions. Paul Reynaud, the 66-year-old former prime minister, grabbed a weapon and stood at a window, firing at the encroaching Nazis with a grim determination. It was a last stand in every sense of the word. The breaking point. By noon, the situation was critical. The Besotten Jenny was a smoking wreck. The machine gun nests were running dry. The SS began firing Panzerfaust rockets at the gatehouse, blowing chunks of centuries-old rock into the defenders' faces. Captain Lee was everywhere at once, his face smeared with soot, his cigar long gone. "Conserve your ammo," he bellowed. "Make every shot count." Major Gangle was on the roof, spotting targets for the few remaining active rifles. He saw a group of SS soldiers setting up a machine gun position that would sweep the courtyard and massacre the French. He moved to get a better angle to warn Lee. A single shot rang out. Major Gangle crumbled. An SS sniper bullet had found him. He died instantly, collapsing near the man he was trying to protect, Paul Reynaud, the only man in the battle to die for the wrong side, fighting for the right cause. A heavy silence seemed to fall over the defenders for a split second. The German soldiers looked at their fallen major, then back at the Americans. There was no betrayal, only a hardening of resolve. They fought harder. But numbers were numbers. The SS were at the gate. They were preparing for the final breach. The defenders fixed bayonets. Lee checked his Thompson. He had one magazine left. He looked at the French VIPs, at the terrified Austrian resistance fighter who had joined them, and at his mixed band of soldiers. They had held out for as long as they could. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the sharp crack of the 88mm. It was a low, rhythmic rumble, a sound that every soldier in Europe had learned to recognize over the last year. From the valley floor, the distinctive thump, thump, thump of heavy machine guns began to echo. Then came the roar of engines. The SS soldiers at the gate froze. They turned to look behind them. Smashing through the roadblocks in the village of Itter came the vanguard of the American 142nd Infantry Regiment. Leading them was not a truck, but a column of tanks. The relief force had arrived. The American 50 cals opened up on the SS positions in the woods. The hunters became the hunted. The SS, realizing they were now caught between the castle walls and a fresh American regiment, broke. They scattered into the forests, melting away like snow in the spring sun. The aftermath. Captain Lee walked out through the ruined gate, past the burning hulk of his tank. He was exhausted, deafened, and shaking with adrenaline. He was met by the bewildered liberating soldiers who looked from the Americans to the Germans to the French politicians. "What the hell is going on here?" a lieutenant asked, looking at the Wehrmacht soldiers who were stacking their rifles neatly in a pile, surrendering not as enemies but as brothers in arms. Captain Lee lit a fresh cigar, his hands trembling slightly. "Long story," he muttered. The Battle of Castle Itter was over. It was the only time in World War II that Americans and Germans fought side by side as allies. Major Josef Gangl was honored as a hero in Austria, a street in Virgil named after him. Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross. As the sun set over the Tyrol Mountains on May 5, 1945, the war in Europe had only 3 days left. But in that small, battered castle, humanity had already won a strange and quiet victory amidst the chaos.